Hello. Let's see. How this goes. Should all be good, I think. Let's see how. Okay. Okay. So this 2-week challenge was to, what was it? You are the sun in my night. Also, like, take one character, you know, hero, villain, or something else, and make the counterpart opposite to it. You're the beauty of my beast, and so on. What is the opposite of a heroic knight? Evil wardrobe monster opposite. Something like that. It's free for interpretation. And what I did was I chose to gender swap Gerald. But I never finished. I went on vacation. Hey, Larry. In theory, I'm still on vacation. How's it going? Another news, I think I defined what the special stream will be because we hit 1,500 members. And I will do a sketchbook stream where I will be going through all my sketchbooks and showing pages, whatever. I'll arrange the camera somehow and arrange some lights so it looks good. And I think that'll be a good extra, like, special stream. And have a group call with whoever want to join. Just sit and talk some shit and share sketches and things like that. If I'm having a good break, yeah, it's pretty good. It's needed. Went out to the countryside, went to a wedding, lots of traveling. But it was good. It was nice. Hey, plumbers. Chillstrand, hey! You're back, plumbers. Been a very long time. Yeah, so I'm a bit tired as well. I stayed, or rather, I woke up early to watch the whole Mayweather-McGregor fight. It's pretty cool. It was interesting to watch. Oh no, Larry, really? Nice. For me, my kid starts at school on Friday, I think. Hey, Mighty to 2100. How's it going? Hopefully, if you haven't followed, can you please click follow to see if the notifications work? I don't know if they work still. I haven't touched the settings, but Firefox has been updated. School starts. Oh man. Lurib, you start your new school, don't you? Must be pretty cool. You got your flat and everything in order. You moved in with your girlfriend? You said you moved closer to your girlfriend, right? That's awesome, man. That's great, Lurib. Glad that everything sorted out as you wanted, with hard work and a goal. That's great. Hey, Morphia. Zaelin. How's it going? I'm just sitting here doodling on my unfinished 2-week challenge. Uh, I went on vacation instead of painting. So that's why it's not finished. Kind of just still in vacation mode a bit. Been squeezing in some freelance here and there, but I'm very much so in vacation mode still. So tonight I will be going through the 2-week challenge entries. Some pretty cool entries, must say. And Morphia, yeah, it was good. It was good. I went to the countryside with my kid's wife and a bunch of other people. Then I went to a wedding in another city. It was a good party. There was this couple that were remarrying, and they had like the whole ceremony again, like church. And I've always felt a little bit awkward in a church because I'm not really, I'm not Christian. So it's always like everyone is so serious in the church, and I'm not joking around in there, but I can't take it serious. You know, like there's no connection to that building. You know. I just don't connect with it. It's cool, it's very, they put a lot of money into the churches, obviously. But yeah, it doesn't, it doesn't have any emphasis on like, yeah. It was a cool ceremony. That's interesting, Lurid. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's morning warm-ups is a good thing, I think. Hopefully they'll allow it in school. Maybe you can talk with your teachers. Yeah, who knows, right? But you don't start from scratch, do you, Lurid? You start from the second year, or do you have to go the first year again? Hey, Golden Tigers, you're back. Oh, so you're starting from scratch. Very glad to see you back, Golden Tigers. So, like I said, this stream will be the 2 week challenge feedback. I'll start it shortly. I'm just kind of killing some time, letting people drop in. And doodling on my 2 week challenge entry. It's not going to be finished, but it's still fun. Still fun to gender swap. My little Geraldina here. That's going to be good fun. Golden Tigers. So did anyone watch the Conor McGregor Mayweather fight? Is anyone interested? And has people seen it that's interested in seeing it? Or is there be spoilers? Spoiler warning. Number one Talon. Oh yeah, you watched it? It's a pretty cool fight. Different. Right. Well, I wouldn't say it's all about the money, but money definitely had a part in it. It wasn't like they weren't trying. Obviously, they were trying. Yeah, the fight was interesting. Like McGregor's awkward, like non-standard non-standard boxing style. Quite cool. Cool to see how it worked and the level. I mean, obviously he's like a first fight boxer in boxing, professional boxing, but it's still cool to see. Cool to see how well he did. Imagine if it was the other way around. Mayweather going to UFC. Hey, Kolska. So let's start the feedback. So this is from Mighty Matthias. I think it's his first entry. He gender swapped. I guess he decided to gender swap one of the what were they called? Borderlands character, Mordecai. I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna yeah, I'm not gonna compare the styles too much because that's not important. So I'm just gonna kind of go by the drawing itself and and touch upon style a bit, I think. I mean, I know Borderlands had like a stylized um, um, style and proportions, right? If I'm not mistaken. I think keeping in this is hard to say if it's style or if it's lack of um, knowledge in anatomy in that sense, you know. So I'm just gonna do a quick little Google on the character, so we are on the same page. Oh, come on. Come on. So that's the original. You know, so it's quite stylized proportions to some extent, right? But the hands, arms are weirdly not pushed. Anyway, so if you just look at the drawing itself, it's I think it's a good start. There's a big problems with like drawing things like that, where it's kind of floating outside the hip, and it doesn't show depth or the cartridge having a sense of 3D that they if anything wraps around the volume, right? They stack more because they're turning in 3D space like that. So seeing it from this angle, we should see them kind of wrap around more. And one thing I find always dangerous when doing line art is doing line art like as a shape that kind of flow through, and it always becomes or an organic shape. And one thing you should try to do is always like draw the objects right. If you draw the belt and then you draw the other object separately, it will always make everything more precise and concrete, and not become very organic. And when they become very organic, they're going to be hard to read, and you group them into the same information, and especially like when it goes out to the edge, because it's all connected, it doesn't feel like it's a handle of a knife more than a belt at the moment. Same thing as all in what a lot of people do mistakes is they don't really think about the ellipse in perspective. You know, like the if the character has their leg forward, you know, or is it, you know, is the thigh really? That would be weird if it would be that much of an ellipse, but the way it is curved like this, almost over the kneecap, makes it very odd, because things like that tend to be higher up. And now maybe the original makes it look like that, you know, that is long, long down on the, a long way down on the leg, but the knee is down there. So it is kind of low, but not that low like here. Like the knee would be there in theory. And because of this V shape there, it makes it look like the crotch, which makes it even more confusing about distance to the top of the, or the beginning of the rib cage. Makes it very odd. I think the lines and so on, the stylization of that is, you know, it works. I think you should, but just a little bit more texture information. Like the original, looking at it, have subtle texture information. I think you could have easily tried to squeeze in, but maybe you didn't have time for it. You need to work on your hands. They are very strange. They don't have like a natural rhythm to them, especially how she holds the rifle. And a lot of these things, the same like the belt, the same like this thing, is not fully drawn in perspective. And it becomes like billboarding the depth without really drawing through the depth of the rifle and the ellipse of this barrel, etc. It just becomes billboarding, and it doesn't sit correctly in space, and then it stops being object in 3D space and becomes a two-dimensional representation of something. When you clearly have perspective in place, and at other places you disregard it, and then it becomes inconsistent, and that's when things break and it looks off. Hey Eric Boy, Jacob Mobley, Zelin, welcome, welcome, welcome. There's certain choices like this seam, you're flattening the shape of the breast. Usually it goes at the volume of the breast rather than cutting against it. And some overall structural lines that should be overlapping and not going behind certain other shapes to make it really coherent in 3D space. But overall, I think it's a cool swap. Small tweaks here and there. I think one thing that you can also play around with, even though this one is quite black and white, as far as I remember, they had quite kind of colorful, right? Stylized like this. So I was just thinking, because it's, the light is quite realistic, and I was thinking what should probably be done is maybe a cleaner difference between what's in shadow and what's in light, even though in the original it's quite subtle, but you still see this clear difference because it's a realistic lighting. I think there's proportional issues with the eyes and mouth and the size of the head. But overall, pretty cool. Okay, let's see where this saves. Saved correctly. Not very in-depth paint over on this one, but it's a lot of same mistakes of perspective and depth and ellipses and drawing like the same line rather than drawing the objects themselves, and using that knowledge where you need it as well when you want to draw a single mass. So here is aluminiums. I think an anti-Rapunzel. So it became the opposite of a damsel in distress, and made it putting the prince in distress, I guess. It's hey Mighty. Oh, so it was you, Mighty Matthias. Yeah, I think it overall was pretty good. Just more structure and like care of proportions and so on, and better lighting. Right, so this is aluminiums, the anti-Rapunzel. I think overall pretty good, but there's parts that messes with how it reads. I think there are more than one issue. First thing that messes with me is her legs. The pose is all weird. I think removing this band should help with the readability, because the way you've drawn the ellipses kind of indicating that she's leaning away a lot with the leg, but then you're having almost a flat line there, which makes it look like we're looking at the leg from the side, which is just is really weird. And you're doing a classic mistake a lot of artists does, which is like duck feet, and you're planting them too much. They need to maintain the structure. They can't like melt into duck feet. So one thing I would do is probably increase the ellipse and show the ellipse more, so it's clearer that the leg is going into perspective, right? That part makes more sense, but then you also have the horizontal line of the hair flattening everything even more. And the pose itself is a slightly odd, the way you've chosen to shoot the hip out like that. I get the idea of the pose, like watch out, but I don't know, for me it's a bit awkward. It's too much back leg shooting out, but I'll try to save it to kind of maintain your pose. Another thing is the shadows you've done. No, those legs are, I don't know what they're doing. Such a big torso and short legs. I'm assuming you used a reference, and the point of perspective and probably has a camera distortion. then all the subtle small ellipses have to be even more perfect in order for the perspective to make sense. But then you also need to draw the whole drawing correctly in 3D space, otherwise it'll just look dwarf-like. Is that better? I don't know it. I think it's better. Something like that? Anyways, let's continue. Let's not get hung up on the legs too much. The other point I was trying to make was the light. And the way you describe the shapes and splitting them up in like small groups of light like that always is hard for the readability. And if you remember those times I talked about rim light and thinking about it like in a 3D space, you know, like as it would be a 3D mesh. Like where would, if there was a light, like shining from a little bit more from above on this, you know, that would be hit by light. This would be hit by light because of the 3D aspect of it, right? And that's just simplifying the shape. So you have to pay attention to which part is pointing away from the light source, which part is not. And if you separate them like incorrectly, you'll be creating strange groups of volume that doesn't make sense, and the brain will pick up on what you're drawing, but it doesn't feel right because the way you chosen to describe the volume of what you've drawn, so it becomes confusing for the brain. And especially if you, like in this instance on the neck here, group it into same-sized objects, the brain stops reading it as a mass and start picking out the smaller shapes, and it defeats the purpose of grouping the light. So same goes for the hair. I think it's a great start, but it's very one-dimensional. You should try to think about it in 3D space more. Where's the light source? What would hit the hair versus what would, what would let it fall into shadow. So you just gotta be brutally honest with what is in detail and what is not, and then arrange everything to follow accordingly. Because if you don't because you've chosen to do light to that degree, you have to follow through with absolutely everything. And that goes for like what is in shadow, what's being lit, where do you spend your effort in details, the shadow side or lit side. Then you need to decide, okay, this is the side that has light, this is the side that doesn't, and then you can start arranging all the information so that it reads more coherent, and you'll get a stronger end result. Having a vertical line fall down like that, it removes the implication of volume. So you gotta never have straight lines like that, and that's your brain saying it hangs straight down, which is incorrect. So you just gotta try to keep yourself from thinking in symbols, like in simplified means, and try to see it for what you're drawing, and arrange all the information. You know, like according to that I've been trying to trying to explain. I think when we talk about design, I think it's a pretty cool design. I think the hair feels maybe a little bit dead, like it's not alive like in the story. You know, maybe it could, you know, indicate more of a path of a story itself. You know, I get it that she uses this as a flinging thing, but you know, what type of character is her hair? Because it is a character, right? In the Tangled cartoon, it's like this sunlight, right? It's this silky smooth magical thing, and in yours it feels a little bit like dreadlocks, tentacly. You know, then how does it attach? You know, is it that, well, should it make you feel? What should it make you feel? You know, the way she uses this and why it feels like seaweed. You know, whatever decision you choose that it should give the viewer, you need to try to figure out what's the best delivery package, right? What gives it, what delivers the idea to the viewer the best? You know, is it making more funky looking, less funky? You know, down to what you want to say. The design of her, I think, is cool. It's a little bit ninja-like. At places, it's a bit hard to understand what the design elements are, like the wobbly line on the thigh and these three white dots and so on. I get that these are metal, like buckles, but maybe you could have suggested them on this side as well, so we understand that it's symmetry. Well, you know, what does these do? What does these gray bands do? What is this made out of? What's this made out of? I think you could push the materials a little bit more in yours, even though it's simple line, not simple colors or line arts, but I see that you tried adding folds, but it's a little bit hard to understand what it's made out of still. That could be with structure, how it folds. Is there any folds themselves across volumes and so on that can indicate what kind of material it is? But overall, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a good job. Hey, Aluminium. You made it. Okay. Here's Kolsgas. Cool anti-bastion. I guess I can find bastion. For you who don't know, it was a game. I think it's an indie game, if I'm not mistaken. like a isometric, cool, good looking game. So you did the anti version. So one way, for example, let's copy this. One way to think about if you when you're doing an anti version, like in Aluminium's case, he didn't flip the character, like because Rapunzel looks different in any version. I mean, and this is Bastion, right? This is a specific character. So let's try to stick to that. One thing you could think about is what is the anti version, and it looks like ghost or dark magic type. You know, like a almost like a anti-gravity, dark side um, version of him. So you could think about these key elements of the character. Certain elements you've changed, and certain elements you haven't changed. So you could have thought, you know, like what is the anti version? Is it the same character and playing with palette? Is it a version where you can change him up more? You know, what is the anti version? I think the anti version, comparing them, is quite close to the original, but then there is small changes that makes me go wondering why they're there. You know, doesn't he have armor on his lower arms, for example? Um, Maybe it's something I don't understand. Like the character has that, but it doesn't look like that's the fact, right? It looks like he has that gear on. So I'm assuming this is the image you actually used to base your anti version on. So that being said, you know, like what elements could you play with in order to do like to enhance that feeling of an anti something? You know, should it be like the same sized, um, everything the same, but just make him spooky looking? Or if you do changes, what are the changes that you decide to do? You know, is it if you go with more anti-gravity, like ghost version, right? There, he had more of this ethereal feel. You know, maybe you could have like had fun with his cape or this scarf. You know, maybe it's disintegrating in the image, and we see this. It becomes this almost like a flame. The same for his hair, which I think is a cool touch that you've done. That it feels like underwater more, and the same for his hammer. Hey, Andre, hey, Belladere. Yeah, so I think if it's just straight up negative version, like the ghost version, you know, I would push it a little bit more, just make it feel like that's the, you know, that's the thing you're going for, right? And I can see that you've added on the ground here that like the corruption, he's entering with the corruption. I would just maybe, you know, wrap it around the character a little bit, or, you know, sell the idea that he is the bringer, he is like a part of the darkness, right? He's the anti-Bastion, rather than staying too safe. Andre. Yeah, so I think overall really cool. One thing when you're doing style like this is that you really need to pay attention to like juicy gradients and making sure that they don't go from black to white. Like you have a base color and then you switch the gradient with just whiter or darker. It's really really important that you use color dodge, especially in a style like this, um, to like boost uh, the gradients, because it's very very easy to have them dull looking, and then it stands out a lot in an image like this when you're using saturation. It's really really key to add complexity to the gradients in a style like this. If you look at Mike Avazido, I hope I didn't butcher his name like I always do. Um, he does that really really well. One interesting thing he does to make that work is that he paints in the channel window. Now I haven't really tried this, so I'm gonna destroy it. But let's say we're on red now, right? So let's I think this is how it does it. I never really tried it. Why isn't it? Hmm. I don't get it. I don't get it why I can't paint. There we go. Now it works. Anyways, uh, he paints in the channels, and that's how he gets his juicy colors, like his juicy transitions. What I do now is just I use color dodge, just to kind of build up the image more, and I think the base he stands on is good, uh, but I think he could have pushed the light closer to the darkness, like his corruption, so that it becomes more obvious that what happens there, and boost behind him as well a little bit, so that we understand that he brings the corruption, right? Um, Another thing is some of your brushstrokes. At places they're great and strong and angular, and some places like in the face they become very like scratchy, dodgy, and that creates like entities or objects of themselves rather than being a part of the image or a part of the face or the hair. You're creating like a separate object, and that might not necessarily be what you want to do, right? So by adding more complexity to gradients and grouping your shapes a little bit better, you should be able to start getting a stronger image. And it's a very fine balancing act where, like where to add difference, where to separate the object, where to blend the shapes together so that they read as a whole much stronger. When it comes to composition, I like this arc, but it feels like it doesn't deliver what it should deliver. I think it's because it's too much edge work at the top, and I think it would be better to have it a lot more subtle, so it's not so stand out, so that the further down the image we travel, the cleaner the edges will become, and it'll help us read the image much better than just having like perfect edges, almost very sharp edges. And I not human eyes love to look at edges. That's something to keep in mind, like where to soften and where to push sharpness. And it can be very, very subtle. It helps dictate where one looks. Yeah, don't get me wrong, Kolska. It's a very cool image. Um, I think you've done a lot of cool things. Like I really like a lot of the background stuff and the circular things and the blue, these blue spirits, and the overall feel of the character. I think is really cool. I think um, there's just smaller things, like when it comes to the shape of the character. I would have probably tweaked a little bit more mass, a little bit probably broader stance, just to indicate power more. And you could also, play with the idea of looking under the eyebrows. Um, I think also one possibly lost potential is this black goo floating up and the ghosts surrounding. It would be, like, could you, add some more of it? In to what extent could you? Is there something more that you could add to the image to help the idea that he's the anti in the world, so he brings the corruption again. I think that seems to be the original idea. Um, there's a lot of subtleties I would change, like how much intensity they are at places around the image and so on. Usually when it comes to illustrations like this, it's all about framing and the light of the character, how the light hits all the forms, and how it sits in the environment. So it's really important to have like a coherent light. And like I mentioned, one of the first things I mentioned was to have more complex gradients, so that now I'm using a lot of the same color, but ideally you treat all the transitions. You could start flat, but then add complexity as you're painting the painting. And now I'm kind of trying to solve the problem as I'm painting, but ideally it's like a fundament from the fundamentals of the painting, like a correction you need to do, like how do you build up the image, right? Now I'm just kind of shotgun with a shotgun solution, broad stroke changes, right? And probably his hair feels very aquatic, but the values are very close to each other. I don't know how you feel about that, but I would probably make it feel a little bit softer. rather than hard like that. Make it a little bit more ethereal. Give it a little bit of a glow, perhaps. So that's my like broad stroke suggestions for your version. Just think about presentation and how you want to up the story elements, and just think about readability with the light on the character, pose. The gradients need more complexity, even though now I haven't done to the extent I would do it fully. But hopefully you'll see the suggested difference and would take it further. It's just that it needs more complexity to the image. A lot of more bounce light, subtle bounce light as well. In order to place everything in a 3D space. Yeah, that will be it. Cool image. Good job. Okay. Zealands. I think this was like the Siamese twin of conjoined twin of polar opposites, which is an interesting idea. Thin and fat, alive and dead. I guess smart and dumb. Spiky versus blocky. Yeah, undead. I said dead alive. It's an interesting concept. All right. Much like aluminiums about how you group the light is that like on a object to object level it makes sense. Good luck, Jacob. It makes sense, right? You've shaded them according to the light source, but as a group of shapes in a 3D space, a lot of it doesn't make sense. You know, like the breast would probably cast a shadow. The depth of this shadow would most likely not be the same across all. You know, because if the shadow is the same on all, that's like the depth of them from the side, right? Or they would even be more like according to the direction of the light source. So if the light source shines down like that, there's a dark shadow, there's a dark shadow, there's a dark shadow. But that's clearly not what you intended, right? Because you're trying to do a 3D character in 3D space because you added that kind of complex lighting. So you have to be daring and decide which part is in shadow and which part is in not, as an overall form, right? Which is pointing away from the light source, which is not. You know, would, like if the light is like up, right, and shining on the character there, would it cast a shadow on the whole arm? And only like a part of the arm starts catching the light and have a soft shadow being cast over the upper arm. Would that be the case? Maybe. But then you need to, light needs to be consistent across all volumes in order for it to, be believable. And as soon as you take shortcuts in like how the light acts, you're breaking the image more and more. So you gotta be very, like, that's why studies, etc., are great, because you can see reality. So when you're doing, let's say, an arm like this, go look at a real arm, be Google bodybuilder arm, or do some push-ups and check out your guns. But overall, like, I can see you're thinking, you just gotta add an additional layer of volume to the character. How deep would this shadow be because of the fact that this shoulder pad is throwing a shadow on the body because the light source is up there. Really, yeah. You gotta do some curls or push-ups, or go scream at a wall or your mirror. Get thin, you lazy bastard. Yeah, anyways. That's what we all do, don't we? Right? Yeah, so you have to think globally, because you're thinking correctly locally in your image. You just need to bring it into the whole picture more in order for it to make more sense. In your image, I think it's a good separation of like dark hair, bright hair, round shapes, pointy shapes. But a risk of doing a lot of round shapes is that it will look like a bag of potatoes. So with organic shapes, you also have to have hard shapes. Oh, thank you. Bye. All right. Yeah, so in a lot of organic shapes, for example, all yeah, that was Mama Viking. All shoulders and joints, all joints are more square, and in a lot of like in the lower arm, there's a very flat line with a soft curve intersecting into the shape, because the reason is why it's important to have hard and soft shapes is because in 3D space, why we see a hard and a softer part, let's say on the silhouette of the arm, is because this muscle connects, goes from top forward, and then there's a second shape, and as we're rotating it, the muscle flips over, and it creates like a intersection, and that's why it looks like in the silhouette like a sharp and a soft edge, but in fact is that the soft edge goes around in the back, and we don't see that because we can't see around the form, right? We can't see the other side. So that's something important. Like, I can see it in your neck, I can see it underneath in the armpit, I could see it in the bicep, and so on. Is that you have to think more through the character, and the dangers of doing these round shapes when they're all just round. Like I said, it'll be like a bag of potatoes, just like round, round, round in the silhouette, rather than interlocking shapes in a figure. There is this in life drawing, um, like S curves. How dare you phone? Oh, it was a station. Anyways, so the S curve rather than uh, brackets. You probably know this, but I'm gonna go anyway. So if you draw a shoulder, the worst thing is to do bracket muscles, like like shoulder, bicep, lower arm. That's because that's the reason why that it's more of a symbol thinking is because it doesn't exist in nature. Nature has designed the muscles in the body where they interlock, so that when one muscle is active, the other one can rest, so that in a full rotation, you'll use different muscle groups um, that are connecting at different places, like a bicep and a tricep. They're not equal on both sides. The tricep actually ends higher up on the arm because it pushes. It doesn't need to do a full lift. This needs to be bigger, so the bicep has more space than the tricep, and so on. And if they're equal on both sides, they're gonna be pushing and pulling in an awkward way. You can do small experiments with like balloons or ropes, and you'll see that on an offset, there's gonna be shifting in how it pulls an object. So what one always should remember is that even though I'm drawing an arm in outlines, um, like what's important is to remember that like the muscles are connecting, in a 3D space, and we can't see the backside, where all the muscles connect. But that is how nature designs everything. It's not same on both sides. So what you got to do is keep that in mind in how you're designing the forms and the muscles. Like the whole bag of potato thing is that you have to make sure that there's a rhythm, like the S curve rhythm, whatever, that they intersect with each other, rather than being equal on both sides. So that's the biggest problem with the light. I like the concept. I think the delivery of it, this metallic structure, um, I get the idea that you needed something to break, something to attach the two. Um, I'm not sure the realization of it, if that was the best idea to do it, because it feels like a belt, and a belt going across all the volumes, up and down, flattens a lot of the volume, and it feels broken. Doesn't feel like it's there on the body. So maybe you could have. I think the biggest culprit is the kind of Eiffel Tower like shape there. It doesn't look like they can bend. Um, so maybe a little bit more elaborate structure where you would have having them maybe break a little bit more, or showing that there's steps in it rather than just a long curve. Um, I think it's a funny idea. I dig the overall delivery, like the way you've drawn it. It's like it's pretty good, but it just stands in a dead environment, and it feels a little bit like, why is it there? Which, you know, why is it so small on the picture? Because it's about the character, right? It's not about the environment it's in this picture, unless it has a purpose why it's so alone in this vast desert, right? Then you could probably have done it differently, maybe a widescreen, and just having this little character in a dead landscape. And if you would see two eyes, one eye, long hair, short hair, but her mouth is closed. Maybe this person should have, this side should be screaming. If it's the opposite person. Yeah, so like I also told, was it aluminium? Yeah. No, I already talked about that. But cast shadows. Yeah, I talked about it there on the arm. I think I could give you like more feedback in regards to like how you render skin tones, or how you try to make them the gradients better. But if you probably heard the Kolskas, so that should start giving you an idea about the importance of a little bit more complexity. So you shouldn't just render white towards black, which you haven't. I see that you used some different colors, but like I mentioned, one of the first things was that you go very equal in shadow on a lot of them, and it flattens the depth, even though locally it makes sense. You really need to pay attention to like the global situation of light and form. And this harness is a bit, I would have done it different. I would have shown that maybe she can move a little bit more, rather than just being, like I mentioned, a straight curve. A straight curve. A straight curve doesn't exist. A simple curve. Yeah, but it's a cool idea. Zeolin did it again. Probably a little bit too tight. Anyways, cool stuff. Thanks for joining in. So next one is number one talent, and I didn't recognize from where this was. Ah, okay. It's Aisling from Guy. How do you pronounce that? Gigantic. 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 So it's this character. So I guess it did a gender swap. And it's not finished, so I will give it some feedback, but um, by the way, one last comment to Zealing. I see that you did really good attempt with perspective. Was good, but much like the other feedback about ellipsis and so on, I think you flattened your image a little bit. So be careful with that next time. I'm trying to find the Aisling start sketches, beginning sketches. No, but odd. Couldn't find it. Zerlin, it was a good attempt. Don't get me wrong. It's good to practice, and next time you will be better. It was here's your version. It was definitely a really good attempt. So keep breaking it down, like I mentioned about shapes and so on. Try to think a bit about it more in a 3D space. And if you want, you can draw on top to try to figure out like what's the relationship between it and look at reference. Children, yeah, it became a gender swap challenge. Right, so number one talent did this Aisling from Gigantic. So you did a gender swap, but you didn't gender swap the spirit. I guess it's like a spirit aiding her, him, her, him. You didn't finish, so maybe that would come. I like the idea of what you've done, but I must say, looking at the original and the kind of direction you would be going, number one talent, yeah, I saw, but I had a memory of you doing specific sketches I couldn't find. Anyways, doesn't matter. So I think stylistically they're going for bigger, stronger shapes. Obviously, it's hard to just jump on the boat of someone else's style. Right, I'll look number one. Yeah, it was those. And I think another one. I'll show you. These I remember seeing that you swapped the character traits.
All right.
Hey, someone. Storm Kira, thanks for the photo. Much appreciated. You and me will Rambo run the beach all day. Oh yeah. A rocky run maybe. Anyway, so that being said, I think if stylistically, what you should try to think about when looking at something like this, and trying to like do a gender swap and you wanted to sit in the same space. I'm not sure you wanted it, but it looks like you wanted them to be quite close to each other, as in they could be the same place, same world. One thing difference in theirs versus yours, for example, is the grouping of values. In a simplistic style like theirs, is that you really need to like have a clear separation, and it's all about readability. If I'm not mistaken, this game gigantic clearly that word is not from me. Uh, One thing that's apparent in that game is instant readability, right? So shadow groups are very important. I mean, shadow groups are very important in general for an image. So what you got to do, like a lot of other artists, is to have clear separations of what's in shadow and what's not. And then it comes to a question of what is fast changing edge versus a softer edge that has a bigger, longer gradient. You know, it can be explained like a ball has a transition from that to shadow, right, in a smooth gradient because the actual curve of the object is changing slowly away from the light source. Then you have like chamfered edges, right? That has just a flat line in between. And then, for example, you could have one that just doesn't. And that happens when a shape changes the depth fast, right? This darker drop. And then you have cast shadows, which should be darker. And dark cast shadows obviously dictates, often it dictates the rhythm. So if you have like a cast shadow that goes on an object or from an object, you really need to like place it wisely and be sparse with it. The reason being if you start scattering cast shadows around or shadows with the same density as a cast shadow or the darkness as a cast shadow, what happens is that you're nullifying the depth. And for example, if you look closer to her hair, there's actually a gradient. It's like a blooming of the shadows so that it groups them even further. They're still there in detail, but the fact that there is a transition of the intensity of the shadows versus the intensity of the light makes the grouping read much clearer. And also, for example, they used saturation on focal points close to the face to help bring attention to the shapes that they carefully crafted to indicate, you know, her hairstyle or characteristics. Sorry, I'm gonna cough. Dry air in here. Yeah. So that being said, with the high contrast and cast shadows, I think some of your shapes they could be stronger, could have more personality to them, and by that I mean I could do a technical drawing of a wardrobe with correct measurements, or a chest of drawers, would probably not be super interesting to look at, but you would know it's a wardrobe and it would fit that purpose to build, whatever you want. But then you could, play with third point perspective. I'm just shooting from my hip here. This is going to be fun. But anyways, you could, play with perspective, with shape, placement, and all these things, and have more personality in the line, right? Or is it a sad little chest of drawer? There's many different ways to do it, and that's stylization, more or less. So what I'm pointing out is that a lot of your shapes here on this character, they are very safe and lacking of personality. There's no stylization. There's no push in the way, for example, you place the lines. Is it in motion? Is there a variety and thickness of the line? I see that you have added some motion to the jacket, but you could argue, is it enough, or should it be more? What's the purpose of it all? And then his sidekick, you made into a demon. I think that's fine, but that said again, I think you could probably pushed a lot more. The stylization of shapes is very realistic, and with everything, if you want to stick to realism, you really need to up the accuracy in everything. With stylization, you can play a lot more with where everything connects and the shape and size of things. But overall, I think it's a cool idea. I think it's a well executed painting, even though you're not finished, you said. But shapes need more pushing, more contrast, core shadows, and stylization. Bring in some of your, what you think is dramatic and funky shapes, and you'll see how much it'll change the drawing. That would be it. I mean, in theory, you would have to start from the beginning. Or you could try to save it, but it's going to be a lot of paint over. Here's Amir. Amir Levy. He didn't finish. He wanted the opposite of that.
All right.
Hey, thanks for the follow. Bitter Cupcake Lulu. Awesome. You and me will rocky run that beach all day long. Where is it? Oh yeah. Apocalypse. Xmas Apocalypse. The big guy sitting on a throne in Guardians of the Galaxy, is that it? He didn't finish. So, whoa. Is that from me or from him? from me. I think it's a cool idea. These tentacles, they don't make too much sense. Connecting like that on the hand. I think his Jesus pose is cool. I wouldn't have everything in the bubbles being silhouetted straight from the side. I would put them in perspective more. Also play with probably with 3-point perspective maybe. So if he's like this, quick and dirty fix. Gonna be horrible because I'm gonna be pushing everything, break everything. But anyways, like maybe have more dramatics in the way you draw him. You know, so we have clearer shadow groups, clearer angles. Play with the idea of who he is, what's the purpose of it. Is he superior? Is he floating high up? Or now he's kind of eye level, so he's an equal. Yeah, things like that. I would probably be drawn differently. And these symmetry is dangerous. That's something you need, but you also need not symmetry. And things you can solve that is with shadows. So there's asymmetrical lighting if you have to have symmetry. Yeah. I mean, obviously, my third point destruction, trying to force a 2-point perspective drawing into a 3rd-point perspective. Liquefy is it is what it is, but hopefully you'll get the idea. You're welcome, by the way, number 1 talent. My pleasure. All right, here comes Mr. Chillstrand's Boris Vallejo Franzetta tribute. Pretty epic stuff. I dig it. It's praise the sun, gender swap. I think the image works compositionally, but there's a little bit of tangent. Here I come to the tangent city, where all the edges are almost touching, and the spaces are equal. You guys, you go to Tangent City every week. Come on. I mean, just look at that. Ah, what a nice tangent. And here. And touching that shadow to that blade. And the horn to that light. Oh man. Just kidding, but you guys have to start looking out for tangents. Just sorry if I sound harsh, but tangents is easy to spot. What do you want, cat? The cat wants to go into my office. Right, so let's disregard the tangents. They'll be fixed. We have now spotted we are in Tangent City, where the grass is green and the edges are scared of each other. Or they have a strange tendency to touch each other, just tip to tip. Right, I understand the idea. You need, you want the light to separate her. No, that's fine, but you can't have tangents that way. Hey, MikoGel1. Have you clicked follow, MikoGel1? That is the question. I doubt it. You should. All right. So, jumping down, I'd say, as a narrative, probably shouldn't have at the edge visible, like it's a crow perching on a ledge. Have it open. Have probably the stairs kind of fade out and don't make a huge deal out of them, because the higher the contrast, the more attention we're going to grab. Follows the way to happiness. Yeah, praise the moon. One thing that Frazetta did really, really well, which we should all go and pay attention to, is his use of lost edges and hard edges and contrast.
All right.
Hey, who's Rocky running with me on this beach? MikoGel1. You and me, Rocky running. I think it's really cool. But one thing I wanted to point out with Frazetta, like if you look at this section versus the intensity of the bare paws and arms, and the head versus butt, like that's very high contrast versus and sharp edges versus the blue shadow that kind of fades out, and the mountain ridge in the background, how that is sharp and turns to shadow. I think that's really, really good. And then he has lines, compositional lines through the drawing that helps us look where we want to look, right? So looking at your drawing, painting, we should start thinking about, okay, where's your lost edges? Where doesn't it need to be a sharp edge? Versus where does it need to be a sharp edge, so that we're starting to get a point of contrast and rhythm of a painting, and where you want to look. So we have fat tongue syndrome, two aspects to keep in mind, right? Contrast and edges. So by trying our best to play with the both, can start building the image up to where contrast and edges and one thing that a lot of people Morphia, a lot of people especially at the beginning forgets about is, let me see if I do a quick Google to prove the point. Is let's see, is use of negative values to lift something out. Let's see. Okay, this one. So here, in this image, the car is like your character in the background, right? And he falls into the shadow. Behind that car is another car that doesn't get direct light, right? But is being lifted out by the negative light of the ambient light, right? So it is not indirectly lit. It's not directly lit. It's indirectly lit. It's being silhouetted, right? Same for the character in this instance. We don't see him. We see him because of the background. And that's a problem, an easy problem a lot of people do. Learning painting is that everything has to be defined with light, where you can do the opposite, like in the foreground. A lot of people do it in just foreground elements, like they do Gaussian blur, and then they get like a curtain effect. But the problem in this instance is that you have the lightning, right? The lightning needs to tell the story. So you can have the lightning light the helmet, light the horn, but because she's jumping forward, right? I would probably silhouette the character and not detail the character's inside too much. So that now you get some lost edges. You get also play with depth, right? We see her jumping down. We see the horn guy silhouette of him rather than him being a main focus. He being hit by light. Let's do a tangent here. Oh yeah, let's put that sword just next to his spear. Look at that. And let's pull the stair just there. Cringe. Right, so with the same idea, you can decide like how you want to deal with the character in the background, right? You can bathe him in darkness and only have the light hit him because he's a bystander, and you can have like sharp lines, subtle details. So if you have to decide, like, is it a triangular composition, which it looks like, you need supporting information that helps push the eye like that, right? That way, or the opposite. So then you need sharper edges. You need details, and with that you can like detail his helmet. Let the light hit some details like on his shoulder, top of his hand, slight like part of the spear. So now we are looking down there, right? And if we're gonna play with the same, but he's being hit by the lightning, warm light. Let's maybe cool. Let's cool down the surroundings of him a little bit, but let's not have high contrast because it needs to lure the eye, but not become a main character. So we can group some smaller information, maybe some narrative element of, I don't know, rubble, old temple, whatever, you know, things that help dictate the eye with hard and soft edges and very subtle temperature shifts and light shifts. Tang art. Tang art. God damn it. That's perfect. We have just created the next movement. Is Dadaism, Cubism, and Tang art. Tang artism. Tang artism. God damn it. Sometimes I'm so stupid. Anyways, so soft hard edges, contrast. Be careful with giving too many sharp edges and too many contrast points. It has to be a waltz. With all fabric, if you give it an edge, it becomes fat. You don't want to have too much of a lit edge, rather have folds being lit or lack thereof, right? So that you have an edge being lit. It's a weird dog noise. Or the opposite. Never have a fat edge on fabric. It makes it look like a thumb with wide fabric, and that's not how fabric is. Same feedback for you when it comes to volumes, even though in your instance they are a lot better. But you really got to think about the full 3D aspect of the volume more. I mean, you've done a good job. I think it's good. I think it just could be better. A little bit tighter, as in accurate. A lot, like I mentioned, to Kolska to use color dodge to make more advanced gradients. I would recommend the same to you. So, like at glares, etc., there's always this behavior of material shifts because of the nature of the material. So, and much like core shadows that I talked to. Who did it? Oh, number one talent. The more you add these color shifts, the less unique they will be. So you have to choose your battles wisely. So when you're doing all these things and you choose where the eye should be going, the dangers of using a soft brush too much is that you're losing textural information and marks that indicate direction. So if you look at Frazetta, you can see clearly a lot of vertical lines in the background, and the direction of the snow, they go zigzag up towards the top, and then there's a huge cluster of very fine details, and then there's brush marks that indicate the direction where your eye should start moving. So all these things you should also start thinking about. So that's, I would say that's the biggest issues. And this a little bit, like I would like to see more grays or blues. This is a cyan, but help push the 3D aspect, because the more you just use one range or one, like purple to yellow, it becomes one-dimensional. I like the fact that you've added it on the bottom side of the fabric and the shield, etc. I think it's just a little bit more choice places where you put it, so that it doesn't become one-dimensional in the way your gradients work. It has to be conscious decision in when do you shift the color and why. That's look at those tangents. Whew. Oh, those tangents, man, just on. Oh, come on. Dang art. That spear, man. That spear is. Oh, it feels so good. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thick Slime. Golden Tigers, yeah. One last thing, when doing magics and shit like that, really make sure that you have brush marks in there that help indicate direction. I know the most of us love the idea of making like the perfect sparkle or the perfect thing, the perfect magic thing, but in reality, especially looking through a lens of a camera, there's a lot of lens effects happening, and even with our naked eye, our eye is a lens, and it adjusts and shifts, and there's a lot of like prisma effects and so on. So what you gotta keep in mind is try to simulate the effect you're looking for. And if you're just going sterile, like a clean gradient in the behavior of the effect, like white to black, white to yellow, it all becomes very one-dimensional, and it doesn't have any impact on the eye as real world scenario, kind of. Does that make sense? So without it, we get the idea. With it, we go, oh shit, power. Yeah. Chunlo art. Yeah, this is Chillstrand here in the chat. Um, on my Discord underneath the stream, I run a 2-week art challenge just to up your game. And after every 2 week, I do paint overs. So here is Chillstrand's contribution. And usually I try not to repaint. A lot of feedback is usually in paint overs, they repaint everything. I usually just try to show things I would have tried differently as a remedy rather than removing the problem to the cause by doing a paint over. So a lot of things are like I would do completely different from scratch, but as they have put 2 weeks into it, I can't just repaint it. I have to try to give a solution to one step up. So for here, I did some paint over for Shieldstrand about just compositional mostly, and some smaller smaller edge work and removing tangents and so on. And it's not that many left. I think there's only 2 left, and then I think I'll call it a day. We'll see. I've been live for 2 hours now. Thanks very much, Thick Slime. And Chunlo and Thick Slime, have you clicked that follow button? I don't think so. I don't think so. Just saying. You know, no pressure whatsoever. All right.
All right.
Oh yeah. Who is Rocky running on the beach with me? Thick Slime. Oh yeah. You and me. We are Rocky running all day long. That's cool, Chanlo. Glad you could make it. I don't think this is finished. This is by Nefas. I don't know who Jack Cinder is. I have no idea. That being said, I think Nefas has done a really cool composition, really good colors. I think these colors could work really well if you would push them further more. I'm gonna try to find a photo. Oh yeah, man, my Google skills are crazy. All right, exactly what I needed. There we go. So, patting myself on the shoulder, Google skills. And anyways, I think a palette like this, where you know there's clear grays, cyans, yellows, and turquoise. I think it's very close to that. And I think if Nefas would keep pushing it, but try to maintain all these this vertical motion in the textures and all the vertical lines, and if Nefas would listen to Chillstrand's feedback about tangents and edge work and so on, I think Nefas is onto some really cool image. I think it's a really cool beginning. I think it's a great positioning of the character, a great positioning of everything actually. I would have moved it up slightly though, just to push it a little bit more to the golden ratio, just for the sake of having the eyeline there rather than perfectly placed on the golden ratio. I wish I knew who the character was for Jack Cinder. Cinderweb? Jack Cinder. Oh, Web saved probably. Jack Cinder. Do you guys know Jack Cinder? I Googled Jack Cinder and all I did was find some like Final Fantasy character. But compositionally, I think Nefaz has struck gold. Love the cast shadow on the leg. I think he could push the shadow more. You know, keep building the image. As far as I remember, I think Nefaz isn't the most seasoned artist, but this just shows that even though you're not like 10 years down the line, you can still come up with some pretty cool stuff that's quite different. So Nefaz, if you catch this, you're onto something. So keep pushing it. Try to maintain the vertical aspect, the vertical brush marks, the relationship between the colors, like the fact that like over here the browns are like almost creating a raster between the turquoise. Really cool. So keep pushing the composition. Maintain asymmetrical lighting. I would probably, because it's a diagonal like this, I would probably have the light coming in with the cold from the top right, warm from the left, so that you can play with volumes and play with direction of the eye, right? So that we have cool, we have warm, and the relationship of the two. Right? Does that make sense? And I think always make a layer as a safety net. And when you're happy with the changes, just before you merge, toggle and look and squint and move back, flip the image and think about, is the changes going in the right direction? And obviously you don't know that. Who knows that? But it's important that you just get a battle plan and think about, is it moving towards that battle plan? Compositional, color, temperature, so on. Just toggle if you're happy with it, make a new layer, or merge down, work it up. But it's really cool, Nefas. I wish you would have finished it. You posted it really early in the competition. So I'm assuming you got busy. It's not working. So let's do the last one, which is Lurib. Lurib did the Evil Ink opposite, I guess. An evil monster in the closet. I think Lurib, you're definitely improving. It's a cool image, but it's a little bit lost in perspective. I think that is the biggest issue. Secondly, the lighting isn't, it is accurate, but also incorrect. One thing that a lot of beginners do is using black for shadow. And if you read, for example, the book of James Gurney, for the realist painter, is that the one? Or Color and Light for the realist painter, I think. If my memory probably doesn't work correctly. Anyways, he talks about darkness, and I also know in with science that the human eye switches to two receptors, which is black and white, and probably we also read in blue into that, but not necessarily in our receptors. So naturally, I think instinctively, we as artists, before theory, think that shadow has to be black, and that is incorrect. So one thing that is very important that you keep in mind is that palette is destroyed by using black as shadow. And if I switch off the light and my camera will only be front lit, the reason why the camera reads it black is because of the intense contrast of the light of the white, because it's a lens that tries to adapt. But my eyes, if I looking away from the monitor, they will switch a lot closer to black and white, and I will start seeing everything just in value. And now I switch on the light, I see temperature. But a camera lens doesn't do that. It just adjusts the value range. So that's why lenses easily shows it black, and that's why in photography you need to put information into the shadows so it looks interesting in a video and not just black, because the lens can't do what the human eye does. Right. That's the theory part. Right. So I see that you used lines for the ground, but then you have lines like this. And the character is standing like that, but here we are eye level with him, so here we see the top of the cylinder, right? But the door is going that way, and the window frame is, or the picture frame is going that way, and then we have tangent. Tangent. Damn it, tangent, tangent. Anyways, and the cylinders on his body, we see here dead on, right? There's no distortion in perspective. Yet there's a line there indicating. So we are in Tangent City, people. Or maybe Tangent Town. It's not that bad. Anyway, so perspective is a little bit broken, mostly in the upper part. Probably more like that. And this part, probably something like that. And okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Lighter color. Sample your darks. That's dark. Let's do it like that. And then we go like that. Yeah, Larry, probably should. So now that I brighten the darks a bit with this light blue, like much like the Bastion piece, we can start putting cast shadows in, core shadows, cast shadows, core shadows. Either way, the darkest shadow, right? And we can help with placing the spider in the world. And now it's going to be a little bit broken, like I mentioned to Chang-Lo, that it's remedy rather than repaint. So it's important to ground objects. Depending on the intensity of the light, it depends on how bright you need to go. So when you're doing a brighter shadow, not using black, there has to be a directional, like ambient light. But you have to choose, much like Gurney talks about, which is the in palette, like what's the primary one, right? Which one dictates. So if you have a strong intensity with main light, you gotta desaturate and limit, have a lot more limited palette. You know, otherwise you're gonna just have a crayon palette, you know, like primary colors everywhere. So what I did was just brightening some spots up because I want to create a new layer, color dodge, and brighten the back up a bit so that we don't limit the character to the threshold of the door, because you've done something a little bit odd for an artist that understands perspective, is that you stopped the world at the threshold and just made it red. You know, like what is the threshold, and then what is the next room? You know, you have an opportunity here to show, you know, mechanics. You know, maybe it's that subtle clasp system. You know, whatever that can be. You know, and also here you should think about where do you want to guide the eye. What's the direction? What's the composition? I'm assuming you want to present the character. Could probably help with highlighting the tubes. Maybe he's going in Rambo style. Is there smoke? Is there, you know, what materials are in there? The tubes probably should be shiny. The fur should probably feel soft because Sally, was it? Sully? Sully. It has very nice fur. Hurri, yeah. Some guidelines would probably benefit. Evan Almundsen does a really interesting way. He does a 3D rectangle as the base of his sketch for the character, and then he plots the perspective out based on the placement of the character within that 3D rectangle. So keep pushing the light, the depth, and one thing that I wanted to add was with this subtle temperature shift, you can give it these cooler points to help indicate like 3D or forms relative to each other in indirect light, so it can never be high contrast. It always has to be subtle, depending on the light source, of course, but you can do that with temperature shifts. Like you can give fur indications with temperature shift. You can have lost edges. You have to have lost edges, so on, and to help dictate the rhythm, because there's a lot of lost edges in the shadows. You have to push the detail and sharpness of edges in the silhouette, as that becomes the main thing. But as always with that, you have to have lost edges and firm edges and sharp edges and shifts in contrast and shift in saturation. So it's a like at this point it's a balancing act. Where can you soften? Where can you sharpen? What's important to be zoomed in on? Is the teeth important to be perfectly articulated to the pixel, or is the fur more important, or the behavior of the canister? You have to think a little bit proactively in the sense of where do you want to put your, in game terms, skill points in the image, right? So is it materials? Is it teeth? Eyes? So if it's eyes, how can you make them stand out, with composition? Or is it the fur, and so on? It has to be a little bit more conscious. It's a little bit more tactics behind it. Even if it's not a very portfolio piece orientated effort, you still have to do that checklist of moves, But me doing these like kind of lighter blue corrections, it needs a lot more work. It needs a lot more subtle blues in there. It's way too one-dimensional in the shadows, but I can sit and paint all this all day. So I'll just do some quick slabs of desaturated ambient light. And soft edges. Anyways, that's my heavy-handed changes to your painting. even though you have contrast here, it's weird contrast. And in my paint over, you obviously need to go in and spend a lot more time with the cast shadows and make sure that they sit correctly as a painting as a whole. It just can't have these changes. The changes need to be thoroughly implemented throughout, rather than just be heavy-handedly placing everything. So keep pushing, and there's a lot more to be had. I think, like, you could bleed the light more, for example. A lot of tricks to play with. Reflections of the door. You know, you can take it a lot of steps forward. But unless the basics are there, you know, it's going to be very, very hard to get to this point without you pushing the painting in the right direction. So keep at it, and at every turn, when you start worrying if it's the right thing to do, maybe go do some research, look at reference, get the inspiration, get a clearer picture in your mind of where you want to take it, and that'll usually help to indicate like where you want to take it. But that being said, thanks everyone for joining the 2-week challenge. A fantastic job. Always fun to do paint overs and see what you guys and girls are doing. As per usual, the PSDs are saved. I can supply them on request if you want the original. Catch you guys on Discord. I'm done for the evening for sure. I'm quite tired. Alright, see you tomorrow morning for 30-minute warm-up as per usual schedule. Okay, everyone. Have a good one, everyone. Bye. Bye. Outro time.